Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast, episode number 2. On this podcast, we talk about a wide range of identity and access management related topics. It might be current events, topics we see come up during our consulting engagements, or other items that we think you might find interesting. If there's a particular topic you would like us to talk about, or just have general feedback or question, you can always email us at questions@identitycenter.com. My name is Jeff Stedman. I'm a strategic advisor with Identropy's advisory practice. Jim McDonald was on a well-deserved vacation, so we've called up a pinch hitter. With me today is Fletcher Edington. Fletcher, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Jeff, thanks. My name is Fletcher Edington. I'm an account executive with Identropy in Austin, Texas, and I've been in the IAM space about 7 years now.
Great. So last week we were talking about how people get into identity and access management, and I kind of mentioned that I didn't really know too many people, really any at all, who started there. They were, kind of other roles and just kind of moved into that position. You've been with Identropy for a while. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into the IAM space? Maybe start with, from schooling, if any, and then into, how you got into where you are today.
Sure. It was kind of a random series of events. So I was at UT Austin here in the computer science school, and I actually did take a few cybersecurity classes that related to identity in my senior year, but I didn't directly relate it to identity. At that time, I think cybersecurity was, as that was about all I knew about the industry. So I had some basic idea, and I knew I wanted to stay in the kind of software, security field going out of college, but I didn't really know how to get into it. So I looked at a couple of options for IBM or Oracle, some internships that I got turned down for that we won't talk about. Then, honestly, what it came down to is between my junior and senior year, I needed a job. It was the summer. I was running out of rent and food money. And at the time I was working 2 part-time jobs, one in South Austin and one in North Austin. So every other day I was driving like 20 miles either way in my broke up truck to try and make some money, until eventually I saw the Identropy internship pop up, and it was like 5 minutes from my apartment. So it was kind of just an amazing coincidence that this job that's been a big part of my life for the past 7 years was really just because I needed somewhere closer to go for work. So I got into the IAM space kind of borderline out of desperation to try and get some food money. But then by the time I got in there, it turned out to be an amazing spot. So I honestly didn't know what Identropy did for about 6 months. It took me a while to figure out exactly what identity and access management was. Like I heard in the last podcast, there's not like a training manual. There's not really like an introductory identity management course. So learning about IAM was a lot of on the job. It was a lot of talking with customers and with people at the organization and partners, and just trying to figure out how does all this come together. So after about a year of internship, from one summer to the next, when I graduated, I got hired on full time as an implementation engineer, and that was, I think, pretty much the only way that you knew people were getting into the industry at that point. Is somebody just saying, "All right, yeah, let's take a chance on this guy. Let's see if we can train him to be a consultant or not." So by coincidence, me and a few other folks from my graduating class ended up at Identropy, at SailPoint, a few at Okta. So there were some people in the space kind of disconnected, and we eventually linked up later on and figured out that we were all in the IAM space. But yeah, it was a lot by accident. So I did implementations for a while directly for customers, and then eventually I rolled onto the sales team, which is my current role here. And so I got kind of a broader view of the industry. But it was just kind of a lucky series of events that I ended up with Identropy close to my apartment, and then I ended up liking the people that I worked with a lot. And then by the time I got around to wrapping my head around the industry, I realized how interesting and fun it was. So that was kind of my long path to get over here. But long and winding road.
So what were you actually studying when you were in school? What did you want to be when you grew up?
At one point, I think I wanted to fly fighter jets. I think I wanted to be a Navy or an Air Force pilot.
So you saw Top Gun too, huh?
Yes, yeah. Oh, I'm in Top Gun too. I'm an extra. I was always interested in kind of math science stuff. And what's really interesting about it is this from the consulting side, the math, science, technology, that stuff's always, it's really interesting, but by far the biggest skill I think that we have on our side, and that honestly, customers, organizations have, is communication. That's the technology is always there. The things that, press the buttons and move the widgets they're pretty much laid out at this point. And biggest thing that I've seen, from college, getting into the industry, and then, moving around to different pieces of the world, is that communication piece is what a lot of folks are missing, and what kind of solves the puzzle for everyone.
Yeah, the communication parts is difficult, and sometimes you just kind of get that through experience, right? I mean, there's obviously naturally gifted, orators who can give a speech, et cetera, but you really need to be able to communicate concepts, right? Here's what we're trying to do: tell stories, make it relatable, because not everyone is, super deep technically, and frankly, you don't really need to be sometimes from an IAM perspective. Most of it's business process. So yeah, I mean, that communication part certainly comes along as you get experience, especially as you learn more about it. You're able to talk more effectively if you know your subject matter, right? That
Absolutely.
kind of thing. So when you were in school, this was, I'm going to guess, what, 10 years ago, roughly?
It was 1994.
1994. Oh my gosh.
That was about 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So, you mentioned, that you were studying some security classes there. I guess what was the draw to get you into the security field to begin with?
The security field, I think, gave me some direction with software management and development and coding. So I was in the computer science school, so we were doing operating systems coding and learning Java and different languages and kind of the underlying theory behind it. But it wasn't really until the cybersecurity classes that I saw like a direction I could go with it. Before that, it was just, okay, do software, be an engineer, code, and that it was just at a very high level for me. So cybersecurity gave me some direct real world applications, like protecting the bank from hackers so that account information is not linked, right? Or protecting a public utility so that the energy for Cincinnati isn't taken down, stuff like that. So it just gave me a lot more clarity on how this stuff affected the real world, and like how that was going to kind of end up playing out in the real time.
So you went from an implementation engineer, and now you moved over to the sales side. How did that come about? And can you talk a little about that?
Sure. Yeah. So that was a little more purposeful than my initial entry into identity management. So, like I said, initially I had no idea what I was doing. Just kind of dove in. I liked the people, and the work was interesting enough to kind of keep me around. And then after a couple of years of doing development and kind of understanding the world a little better, I got to a point where the technical implementations, while really rewarding, and like you go in every day and you get something done and you can say, okay, yes, I did these 3 use cases, this is great. I wanted to get a little broader understanding of the world. I wanted to see, why is the engineering work I'm doing important to the customer? Why does my architect and my project manager and the sales guy and the director on both sides, like why does all this matter? And the sales team at Identity here, as a small organization, it's a great way to see kind of all pieces. I'm talking to the engineering team, I'm talking to the advisory team, I'm talking to finance and partner management, and externally I'm talking to vendors and partners and analysts. And it just got to, I knew I wanted to get a little deeper into the game, and it seemed like the best way to do it from where I was at with engineering. So I basically just went to the management here at Identity, Vic and Jeff and Luis at the time, and talked about transitioning to sales. And luckily, Luis Almeida just happened to join about the same time I was getting into this, and he created kind of a entry point of the sales team for me. So it was a couple of months of transitioning for, I was basically doing engineering and sales work for a while. And then eventually it became more and more sales until I was just fully transitioned over. And now I don't ever need to do engineering again.
You sound a little bit happy about that. What was the hardest part about that move over, from going from an implementation side into, on the sales side, and looking to kind of grow your overall knowledge?
Yeah. So I think the transitioning from engineering itself, like as an act, wasn't hard. And it actually, having been in the world for a little while to do implementations and understand some of the technology, I think it gives you a good sense of like what are you actually selling, right? Like when I tell a customer, okay, here's the couple of use cases this product solves, and here's kind of roughly how it goes. I actually, I've done that before, so I kind of at least have an idea of what I'm talking through. The toughest transition was that, identity management as a business problem as a communication point for an organization is a really, really big challenge. So I think the biggest thing I had to wrap my head around was that I'm talking to a representative from a customer organization, and they're going back to talk to their team and their management and their finance and try to organize this giant project. And, the best we can do as a sales team and as an organization that works with customers that well is to try and simplify that process for them. And that took a while for me to wrap my head around, that this is such a complex problem that the communication was going to be a big deal between their team and my team and the different organizations that might be involved there.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. The folks that are reaching out to you, what are some of the challenges that they're bringing to you directly, saying, here's this problem I have?
Yeah.
Is it mostly around, identity and automation? Is it single sign-on, multi-factor? What are you mostly seeing out there?
For the most part right now, as a use case, I think it is in general automation. Whether it's MFA or whether it's provisioning, whatever it is, there's some process that's either behind the times or that's never been actually automated, and now they're looking to modernize or looking to augment the program. And I think the differences between I think there's differences in levels here at what customers ask for. There's a technical level, there's a financial level, there's a business process level. And for the most part, the conversations I'm having tend to be kind of that, like, what business problem are we solving here? Is it an audit finding? Is it we're going through a merger? There's different levels of it. And I think what it really comes down to for us is like risk mitigation, that customers come to us with a problem and the technology is all there. If you want identity governance, if you want access management, if you want a CASB solution, like all these technologies are pretty mature. And for the most part, you can kind of make the technology do what you need it to do to solve your challenge. But the real question they're having is, I'm about to do this. It's going to cost a lot of money, take a lot of time and a lot of our resources. Is this going to work? And so the best thing that we do as an organization, I think, is kind of talk them through, like, okay, here's our experience over 10, 15, 20 years for some folks on the team. Here's what we've seen in the field, and here's the safest way for you to do this and achieve your goals. So, I think that the big thing customers bring to us at a really high level is not necessarily fear of failure, but just a constant worry of, like, look, I've got 4 million things on my IT security plate, and I can't have this go poorly. This is way too important for this to go badly. So that risk mitigation is important for us.
Yeah, and that validation, right, the direction. And we see that a lot on the advisory side. Are we making the right decision? What should we do? And it's funny you mentioned, the challenges. Sometimes the challenges that are kind of initially presented are really kind of masking other problems beneath it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Business process or just organizational kind of, let's say, culture, right? Maybe isn't where it needs to be for change, those sorts of things. I mean, all that kind of stuff comes up. But it's interesting to hear you talk about that from your side, where it kind of initially, things are getting posed to you, and we kind of have to suss out, right? What's the real issue here? What are we trying to solve? And you talk about budgets, right? IAM is expensive, just like any other type of, technology, and for the security side of things, it requires an investment. I think that's one of the challenges that I see quite a bit is, okay, now we've got this plan. How do we pay for it? Right.
Yep.
I mean, it's expensive, and unless there's, truly a desire to move forward, sometimes you can have a great plan and it just kind of sits on the shelf, which sucks. Right?
Absolutely.
You spend all this time to kind of pull together, and then, it's a year later and it's like, so how are we doing? Yeah, we did.
Well, we haven't done anything.
Right. Yeah. So, trying to make sure that you've got the budget up front certainly helps.
Yeah.
But there's ways around that too, right? You don't really eat the elephant, all at once. You eat it one at a time. So, let's start small and try to build out what are the key things to kind of get done first, right? And then let's figure out what's a must-have versus a nice-to-have, and try to build out something that makes sense that way.
Yep. Yeah, luckily at this point, the technology's also gotten modular enough where you don't have to say, okay, we're going to implement all of our identity use cases because this one solution, you have to either turn the switch on or turn the switch off. There's a bunch of different buttons you can press now to say, okay, we're going to fix password management over the next few months. Then we're going to fix provisioning. Then we're going to fix single sign-on. So, you can kind of break off the different pieces, as opposed to saying, okay, like, we're going to go away for 3 years, and when we come back, we're going to have a full IAM program. So, that incremental progress over delayed perfection is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it used to be, there were only a handful of technologies out there, right? It was Oracle, it was IBM, it was CA, and now you've got, kind of the next generation, well, we'll call it the current generation of IAM tools, things like SailPoint, Savient, One Identity, those types of things that are out there. And they certainly took a different approach, which I think really helped the industry grow and move forward by taking that modular approach. There is a little bit of a challenge that I see now is it's almost sometimes too modular, right? There's so many different tools,
Right.
and trying to get all of these things to play together correctly in the way that they should can sometimes be a challenge. There's been some work around that, though. There's different alliances between the different vendors and plugins and all this other stuff. But I think overall the modularity has gotten a lot better, where you can turn on, hey, let's just do Active Directory, automated provisioning from Workday. And that's simple enough typically to configure in a matter of weeks. Technically, right, it's all the stuff that goes around it that takes a long time. It's the organization, it's change management, it's, testing. When I was on the customer side, and, just being transparent, I used to be a customer of Identity. When I was running, IAM operations, I was feeling a lot of pain from a bottleneck on the inside, because the contractors are getting everything done and we're working to kind of test things, but then it would get bottlenecked because the internal team just couldn't keep up with making sure that, that testing was done correctly, that architecture boards were satisfied, that software review boards were satisfied, right, change management windows, all that stuff. So the technical component is certainly a lot quicker than it used to be, but the stuff around it really hasn't changed too much, at least from an organization standpoint. Some are better than others. Some move really slowly. Some move, relatively quickly. But I think overall, that process is pretty much, stayed the same.
Yeah. And, taking a cue from the name of the podcast here, Identity at the Center, I think you're right. The current and next gen wave of identity solutions is about tying everything together in your IT program with identity. It's where is this identity going? What device is this identity using? Which application are they logging into? There's a bunch of different questions, but it all relates back to identity. And on the technology side, most of those challenges have been, I don't want to say like 100% solved, but for the most part, like if you're a business and you want to buy a solution to fix an identity problem, there's probably a solution out there for you. So at this point, technology is not really the problem, but you're right. Like the organizational challenge of saying, okay, we're going to buy a SailPoint, we're going to buy a Ping, we're going to buy an Exabeam, and then we're going to have an IT security program. I think people underestimate the organizational challenge to first just acquire those softwares and, really understand like what it's going to do for your program. And then the big problem we've seen is that customers will buy these softwares. They have all these things stood up, but then they don't talk together. It's you lose the entire focus of identity-centric security if you have these multiple great solutions and they're siloed and the technologies don't integrate and the teams that run them don't even know each other's names. So we see organizations all the time have breaches or problems occur where the identity governance tool probably could have deprovisioned the access, and the behavior analytics tool probably could have detected the anomalous behavior early, but because these things weren't integrated, that you're losing the value of it. So, and that's not a technology problem. You're right. That is a organizational challenge from top down and bottom up to say, okay, the IT security director knows who the access management manager is, and the engineers are all going to be able to communicate together to successfully triage and figure out where these problems come from, and then hopefully cut out problems as early as possible.
Yeah, there's so much data hiding within even just your basic IAM system that sometimes just never sees the light of day.
Or is missing context from another system. There may be data that you have there that if you had it plugged into your SIM tool, it would have detected, okay, based on these other logs, here's the contextualized problem you have now.
Yeah, and it's a challenge because you have to walk, before you can run, and sometimes you got to crawl before you can even walk.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that I see that on my consulting engagements, they're still using paper and, sometimes faxes, right, to get stuff done. You can certainly add intelligence to it, but that's typically something that, we got to kind of work on down the road.
Yep. Gotta get
But
the
it
basics.
requires an investment, right? It's a program, not a project. So you start with the basics, then you start adding on, you start to try to figure out how to get more value out of it. You pull your metrics out, you do your reporting, you find your orphaned accounts, you find where your risk is. There's great tools, Exabeam is one of them. I know that we have a lot of experience with that one. And that's something that really interests me is that behavior analytics side of things, to try and detect issues before they become a problem.
Yep.
That's one of the things that I know that organizations I've worked for in the past have struggled with, right? There's never enough people, on your security operations team to try and find, these needles and haystacks. And sometimes you don't really know what you're looking for anyway, unless you have an identity background. So when there's tools out there that can kind of help pull that forward, I think that's a win for everybody. But it's an investment, right? You've got not only in just the technology, but in making that integration happen between your different systems, right? Getting all of your applications on board to be part of the program, and to work towards getting more value out of all the tools is certainly a challenge.
Right. What's your experience like with these with programs that are doing this well? Do you see a lot of customers moving this direction? Do you see people struggle with this concept? Like, what's your experience on the advisory side of talking to folks about this identity centric kind of vision?
Yeah, so I'm going to caveat it, because you typically don't call advisory unless you have problems, right? So my view on the advisory side is going to be a little more skewed in the
yes.
Hey,
everyone I talk to is on fire.
Right? Yeah, let's get things fixed. But there are certainly organizations that I think have invested the time, and it was not an overnight success. I'll bring up Capital One. Actually, they're somebody that we worked with in the past. They recently gave a talk at the Identiverse conference, and now they started to open up their identity proofing technology to other areas. This is a bank who has invested in IAM for good reason, right? I mean, we're talking about money. They've got to make sure that the right person has the right access, for sure. But they've gone a step further, I think, than other folks in the finance industry, in actually opening up the technology that they use to move forward with that identity proofing, and offering it to other folks to use as well. Which, it's interesting if you think about it, right? Here's a bank who's doing IAM work, so they had to start somewhere. They've got good internal processes around it and a really talented team there. But that's not something you see every day, right? And there's obviously the big organizations like Google and Microsoft and Apple who have all taken strides, especially like on the OpenID front, or being able to log in through SAML, those sorts of things, and kind of having your social identity be your authentication, which is overall a net win, especially on the consumer side. Less accounts to manage. You can kind of make one account super strong and make it easier to to manage for yourself individually. But I think, I think the trend is a lot of people want to do it. They see the value in it, but they struggle with connecting year one, maybe, of a program with year 3 or 4 or 5.
Right. Yep. And security it's like being an umpire, right? Like the best umpires are the ones you never hear about because there's never any problems. So it's
exactly.
kind of tough to get funding for something that's like, you're never going to hear from me, you won't ever talk to me again, and we'll have the most secure program on earth. Like, that's how do you get budget for that?
Right, exactly. In the meantime, IT or security is having to staff up, dozens of people to kind of make things look like their work. Pay attention, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Things are just kind of
working hard over here in security.
Right. Yeah. So, that's certainly a challenge. I want to bring it back towards, how do we get younger talent into the IAM field directly? It doesn't strike me as a super sexy part of security, although I would argue, it's a fundamental part of it. Most of the breaches that you see started with identity at some point, right? So I guess what's an approach that you think would be helpful to kind of reach out to the younger folks who are in school thinking about it, and kind of pull them forward? Because I really think that we need that younger talent to come into the IAM field and help drive the future of IAM, right? What's the next interface look like? Is Alexa or Siri or Google or Cortana, going to be handling IAM functions in the future? What does that interface look like, right? People are kind of expecting, different experiences now than maybe, even 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think even when I got in the industry in 2012, 2013, IAM as a specific industry hasn't really been around that long, as a pure focus. So I think it's still kind of developing, and it's still small enough where most of the people in the space, most of the, you go to the conference, you go to 5 conferences in a year, and you'll see 80% of the same vendors at every one. You get to know everyone and kind of see everything.
Hmm.
Whereas, you go to something like an AWS conference or like a Microsoft conference, and there's 4 million people there, right? There's, so many different pieces of the other IT security and larger software. But IAM specifically is such a niche industry that it's been a little tough, I think, to build a recruiting strategy when you're just trying to like flesh out your business here, right? As different organizations, and something Identropy. I don't know if it struggles with, but just by the nature of our business, we're a remote company, so organizations that have folks working outside of the headquarters or in different locations, it's kind of tough to onboard a lot of cultural or a lot of culture to when you're saying like, okay, Skype in from your Seattle office to our Missouri office, and that's the all hands meeting. So it's kind of a different world that we live in now than maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, when you kind of had to be near your people physically, and it was a little easier to say, okay, well, if we have 10 people here now, let's just go recruit at the local college and hire a couple of interns and build the team here. So the distributed nature of our work makes it a little tougher to onboard people. But you brought up an interesting point about the next wave of IAM technologies and integration with AI and voice-based controls and things like that, and social media logins. I think there's an opportunity for the younger generation coming out of college and with earlier experiences here to start to do some really creative things. I think because the industry as a whole is still kind of fleshing out here, a lot of it has been kind of utilitarian. It's been like, okay, what we need an IAM technology to fix this business problem, and it hasn't really gotten to that iPhone, iPad point where it's like, okay, now we have phones. What's some cool stuff we can do with this technology? So we haven't really started fleshing out to do fun, interesting things necessarily. I know there are some cool projects out there, but I don't think there's been like a like a Steve Jobs press conference to say, here's the future of fun IAM technology. So there's going to be some opportunities, but I think the big deal is that the folks that have been here a while, the folks that are in the industry, I think we've got to do a better job creating an atmosphere where the younger generation wants to work. And, that goes for people just outside of the mainstream, the women, minorities, getting other people in the industry. I think it's about creating a more inclusive, open environment that kind of fosters that creativity and discussion-based stuff. So I think we're heading more there. And I think a lot of people talk about wanting to do it and, trying to figure out different ways. And so I think we're probably on the cusp of some cool programs coming out from some larger vendors and some smaller players like us. I know that in the past couple of months we've hired a few younger engineers and tried to get them onboarded to start doing IAM work, and it's just I think talking a lot with them about what interests you and what's a good place for you to work and what do you guys want out of this, and then trying to build a program around that. I think we have a tendency to kind of look at the problem from our point of view of like, oh, we don't have enough young people in the industry. What do we do about this? Instead of going to talk to young people and asking them like, what would make you want to work here? So I think there's probably a collaboration aspect that would help some of those conversations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, it's an interesting point you bring up around the remoteness of the company, right? You work in the Austin area, and we have an office there, and you do have congregation, of folks who come in and so forth. I'm in the Chicago area. I'm by myself, which I like. That's great for me.
Yeah,
I've had plenty of congregation at work, over the years, and now I'm enjoying work from home. But that might not be something that appeals to folks, right? They want to have more of a social experience, especially when you're younger side and you're looking for more mentors and stuff like that to kind of help move you forward and figure out what the next steps are going to be for you. The thing that I think interests me the most is, where does UI design go next, right? I mean, if you think about it, 15 years ago, IBM, Oracle, their UIs were not great. They were utilitarian. They were, basically a spreadsheet. That was pretty much it. You've seen definitely big strides by SailPoint in that regards, and sort of the current generation. I see what Savient is doing today, and I really like what they have from a UI perspective. I just wonder what's next, right? What's the next UI look like? And I think that's where, the design aspect of IAM sometimes gets lost. Is it can be just as much of a product as anything else. If you can make it super easy to use, people want to use it. Let's get some of that fresh blood in to figure out, does this make sense? How do we make it just work, right? Just kind of like the Apple motto.
Yep.
And kind of move things forward on that front. The technology is the technology behind the scenes, but it's like you said before, if it's working correctly, you really don't notice it, right?
Yeah.
It's transparent to the user. And in the end, that's a win for everybody, right? It increases adoption. Everyone becomes safer, more secure. You're mitigating risk all over the place, that kind of thing.
Yep, you are exactly right.
All right. Well, I think this is probably a good spot to wrap it up for this episode. I want to thank you for pinch hitting for Jim. And I know he'll appreciate the baseball analogy since he's a huge baseball nut, and I am not. So with that, we'll go ahead and close out, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks.